Assembly District and currently the 17th Senate District, which includes Santa Cruz County. Currently, he serves as Vice Chair of the Joint Committee on Rules and is a member of the Senate Committees on Budget, among others. In Monterey County, he works on a strategy to develop the coastal trail in the Big Sur area and has worked with the state and local agencies to remove the San Clemente Dam, providing safety and ecological benefit to the region. Last session, Senator Monning introduced Senate Bill 623 to provide drinking water solutions to Californians who lack access to safe and affordable drinking water. Prior to his service in the state legislature, Senator Monning was a professor at the Monterey College of Law and the Monterey Institute of International Studies. He received a BA at UC Berkeley and a law degree from the University of San Francisco School of Law. So please join me in welcoming Senator Monning.
Good morning, almost good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity to join you. I just want to start by thanking Sierra, all the organizers, the speakers who shared so much. Let's just give them a big round of thanks. So I thought I would give a couple of updates related to state budget and climate crisis, and then some specific legislation that we've introduced this year with some overlapping connections to watershed, native plants, etc. I do want to start with just a quick PSA on the coronavirus on everybody's mind and everybody's headlines. We've been having briefings from Office of Emergency Services every afternoon for the last 3 days with our State Department of Public Health and our State Director of Health and Human Services, and then with county health officers. And I think the reassuring news is that California is well prepared in the sense that we have an infrastructure at the county level for public health response to other infectious disease outbreaks, measles, other public health risks. There's an infrastructure in place. And now with the coronavirus, we've just received capacity to do testing in California, not having to send samples to Atlanta. And so that's going to increase California's ability to test more quickly any suspected infectious carriers, if you will. It's early to know what the trajectory might be. At the one hand, we have the current occupant of the White House saying this is a passing phenomenon, a Democratic hoax. I don't buy that. But I don't think this should be a partisan issue. It's a public health crisis and has the potential, a potential we're not certain of. But I want to offer you from the state of California, the governor, on down to our county health officers are deploying necessary resources in quick response. The other disclaimer, my wife is a physician, and we got this from OES as well. The masks that everybody is running to buy at Costco, the gauze masks, they don't protect you. The mask is worn by somebody with infection, not to spread the infection. The only mask that will protect you is really a respirator or high-quality medical-grade hazmat mask. So if you're frustrated in finding gauze masks at your local Costco, as long as you're not the carrier, wearing that is not going to be a protective matter. Washing hands frequently, and as I was greeted here today, people are starting to embrace elbow bumps. That's probably a good strategy as well. So that's the public service announcement. The OES website is probably a good place along with CDC. We are working closely with CDC. We were disappointed, that's the Federal Centers for Disease Control. Their budget, particularly around infectious disease response, has been dramatically cut. It has not been in California, and we work closely with federal CDC doctors and staff. Coming back into San Lorenzo Valley and water, we know that from these presentations, So much of our ecology is connected, from the health of our oceans to climate and climate crisis. So I'm gonna just start with a quick reference to the governor's budget that's been introduced in January, and our continuing efforts to try to be aggressive and recognize the urgency of the climate crisis. And I think when you talk about climate change or climate crisis, anytime you use that term in a sentence, you should also include the words public health. Because ultimately, when we look at stresses on our environment, we're looking ultimately at stresses on public health and ultimately human survival, plant survival, animal survival. So the stakes are very high. The state of California has been a leader nationally and internationally, but we realize we need to be doing more. The governor's budget, I think, is a blueprint of our values, and in this case, a blueprint of investment to continue to accelerate our objectives. I also sit on the California Air Resources Board. I'm proud to represent that we are ahead of schedule in developing our renewable energy sources, but we're behind schedule on limiting and reducing vehicle emissions. That's still the leading cause of kind of unchecked emissions, even though there's a small trend moving towards electric vehicles. It's less than 1% in the state of California. It links to housing. It relates to homelessness. The housing component in my district, the #1 complaint in the 21 cities I represent is lack of affordable housing, and so workforce have to commute longer and longer distances. When I go to Sacramento on Monday morning, I go over the Pacheco Pass to I-5. The westbound coming from the Central Valley, it's 6:30 in the morning on a Monday morning, it's gridlock. People moving to jobs in Santa Clara County, Santa Cruz, Monterey counties. We have to do better at building, creating, and sustaining affordable housing closer to where people work. So in that housing spectrum is also the issue of homelessness. And we saw in one of the slides how homelessness also impacts water quality, habitat quality, as people live in tent communities built along waterways. It becomes part of our ecological crisis related to the housing crisis. So interestingly, Governor Newsom's State of the State speech a week or so ago was unprecedented because he focused on the singular issue of housing. No other governor has ever limited a State of the State speech to a single issue. Now, it was actually multifactorial under that umbrella of housing because it was homelessness, mental health, and affordable housing. And I just mention that overlay because when we talk about the San Lorenzo River watershed and protecting its habitat, which goes beyond the water, but as we learned, goes to native plants and the ecology of the forests and fire risk, etc., we learn more and more that our shared ecology, everything is connected. So the health of the San Lorenzo watershed is linked to the climate crisis. It was mentioned that in February, what was it, since 1852, the driest February ever. Our water tables are below average for rainfall, for snowpack this time of year, and we don't know if we're entering months of dry weather or something that may be declared the next drought. Part of our Mediterranean ecology is historically years of drought, even before declared climate crisis. So managing our water, reusing, recycling, recharging our water becomes critical to our sustainability, and with sea level rise, etc., all the more important how we manage and how we control our precious water resource. I want to mention a couple of things we've done as a state and more specifically regionally, and then, as I said, focus on some of the upcoming opportunities, as I'll call them, for this legislative year. It was mentioned in the introduction by Sierra, the work we did to remove the San Clemente Dam. Well, the San Clemente Dam was built, I believe, in the 30s and late 20s, early 30s, and was to protect downriver inhabitants of the Carmel River Valley from flood, and to be able to release water, and it was used, that Carmel River is the primary source for drinking water for the Monterey Peninsula. That dam over years filled with sediment and silt. And so it was decommissioned years ago in terms of serving a vital function and became really an impediment to that habitat as measured by the life and the sustainability of the steelhead trout, steelhead salmon, that were stopped by the San Clemente Dam, even though it had some huge steps on it. Most of the steelhead perished when they made it to the San Clemente Dam. Callium spent a lot of money trying to save steelhead that got literally knocked out when they hit the dam. They would be rescued and they would try to revive and rehabilitate those steelhead with about a 50% or less success rate at a cost of about $2 million a year, and then releasing the saved steelhead back into the river to once again ram into that dam and either make it or not. So the takedown of the dam was about a $90 million project. My Senate bill, or Assembly bill at the time, 565, secured state contribution to a package that included environmental organizations and Callium. We secured about $25 million from the state budget that allowed for the takedown of the dam, but not trucking out the torn down dam components, using them to layer upstream, but are now much more natural steps for the steelhead to migrate farther upstream, and the miraculous restoration of that steelhead population within just the last 2 years. The Steelhead Society, who were full supporters of the dam deconstruction, it was the largest dam deconstruction ever in the history of the state of California, and also very costly. So we learn as we go, and often today's prescription of building a dam becomes tomorrow's worst practice. So as we learn more, as science learns more, we're informed by that science, and then we try to take public policy steps that inure to the benefit of our shared and natural habitat. So the San Clemente Dam represented a huge coalition of partners who came together to help to restore that habitat. When we look to the San Lorenzo River, we don't have dam issues, but we do have water quality issues. The different contaminants, human contaminants, we learn more and more about the lifespan of contaminants that we might ingest in food, and now they show up in river water as it goes into a treatment facility. It's been suggested, this is not to be morbid, but after people die now, the body stays preserved longer because of artificial preservatives in our bodies. But just a side note on that detail, there's legislation this year to allow Californians to have their remains composted, as they're doing now in the state of Washington, as something compatible with Mother Nature. So follow that one. I believe it's Assembly Member Garcia in the Assembly who's carrying that and using the model of the state of Washington. Sierra also mentioned a bill I carried. It was actually a 3-year effort to get the Clean, Safe, Affordable Drinking Water Act passed in California. What we learned, most people, if you mention contaminated drinking water, you mention Flint, Michigan, everyone knows about Flint, Michigan, lead contamination of the water, and a sordid story around that genesis and how that's happened. We have more people in California who don't have access to clean, safe drinking water than those impacted in Flint, Michigan. About 1 million Californians today live in communities where they can't drink out of the tap, they can't bathe or cook with the water in their water system. It's about 300 communities around the state. The common denominator is poverty and small water districts, where the ratepayers can't raise the sufficient resources themselves to provide for treatment facilities or linking with a safer, bigger community and its clean drinking water. So we worked for about 3 years. Governor Newsom became a champion of this. He mentioned it in his first State of the State address last year. His wife, the first partner, also started speaking about it at her speaking engagements, and we ended up with bipartisan support in both the Senate and the Assembly for what became Senate Bill 200, genesis from an earlier 623, that the governor signed into law. And the signing was interesting. I'll just share this quick image of the signing ceremony. We went to Fresno, then we went to Sanger, then we went to Tombstone. Tombstone is a community near Sanger, farm workers, dirt roads. When we went into the home that was going to host us, a farm worker mom who had been an activist supporter of our legislation, and her 4 children, a small, what we call little rasquache home, a 1-bedroom, very small home. She greeted the governor, and we were joined by Dolores Huerta for the signing ceremony. We first met in the living room of her home. The media was outside, and the governor with his interpreter learned from this family that they were getting 1 5-gallon container of water per week that they used within 2 or 3 days of rationing that for bathing and cooking and drinking. When it ran out, they went to the corner store and bought bottled water on their very limited farm worker income. We also noticed on the street there was a lot of refrigerators just out on, there was no sidewalks, but on the side of the road. And the governor asked why all the refrigerators. And the mom said, because the water is so bad, it comes into the refrigerator and the ice making machines and it rots out the innards of the refrigerator. So they add to that poverty budget having to replace refrigerators every several months. So at that signing, the governor pledged that this community, among others, would be a priority. The money's already moving, $130 million a year for 10 years, a $1.3 billion commitment to remedy these communities through different means, either a treatment facility, operations and maintenance, dollars to operate those. Some had a treatment facility, but they couldn't pay for the management of it. Or connection, consolidation with another water district. So this community of Tombstone will probably be linked to Sanger's water system, and that tie line, it'll be about a $3 million project. It's already funded. So now it's just getting the permitting and the design and construction underway. I invited the governor to please come back to Tombstone on the day that we can turn on the water with Mrs. Garcia, whose name was shared at the time of the press conference. But that's the type of effort that, again, public health. And you look at the contaminants in these water systems, most people conclude, well, it must be agricultural contaminants. That's part of it. It's only about 40% of it. About 60% are what we call naturally occurring contaminants, arsenic, lead, others. They become more exacerbated when the water table is depressed, either by overdrafting and or drought in the combination. So that's again where climate crisis connects to quality of water water availability, and an increase of the percent that those contaminants represent when you decrease the water level. So that Senate Bill 200, which was the final version, it passed because of these most affected communities making multiple pilgrimages to Sacramento and visiting often with urban legislators who represent large populations and have huge budgets in their water districts, and trying to get them to embrace what some saw as somebody else's problem. You know, we're kind of hardwired to represent our own districts first. That's who elects us, and that's who we're accountable to. In my case, I represent a largely rural district, and there'll be beneficiaries of this in Watsonville, Castroville, Salinas Valley. We have a number of water systems that will be beneficiaries of this. Let me move to some of the work we're doing in the resources area that the San Lorenzo watershed may indeed be a beneficiary of. There's a couple of bonds being discussed. We call them climate resilience bonds. Senate Bill 45 by Senator Allen, a colleague from Santa Monica. It proposes the Wildfire Prevention, Safe Drinking Water, Drought Preparation, and Flood Protection Bond Act of 2020. So in that, I haven't talked about wildfire, but that's been a huge drain of state resources, not to mention perhaps the most immediate public health risk and crisis, the loss of life, the loss of property, PG&E in bankruptcy court. That's probably a topic for another day, but again, it's connected with our shared and common ecology and the greater wildfire risk. Some of those towers, and Santa Cruz is affected by this, when some of those high power towers were built, the permitting required them to withstand 80-mile-an-hour wind. So they were built to specification to withstand 80-mile-per-hour wind. They weren't built to sustain 120-mile-an-hour winds that hit them in Northern California and took some of them down, that are believed, and CAL FIRE has concluded, sparked some of these lethal fires. So as Governor Brown called it, we're living in a new abnormal, and it requires us to be more proactive in our prevention, and that's why a lot of our fire budget is going to clearing, to these controlled burns, to working with California Conservation Corps, with CDCR, prison inmates in the non-fire season to try to get a jump in high wildfire urban interface. Those have been priority areas for investment. We've also been dealing with cancellation of insurance policies. Anyone here received a letter canceling your fire insurance? I see a few. If you call our office, we are keeping a record of those. We're working with State Insurance Commissioner Ricardo Lara, and we're working with Assembly Member Limon and Assembly Member Lorena Gonzalez to require insurance companies in the state of California. You can't force them to take on risk. They're businesses. They run by a bottom line of profit. But we can regulate them, and we're trying to use a model used in Colorado that says if you harden your property and meet certain agreed upon clearance areas, hardening around your property, etc., if you meet some of those standards, in Colorado, one county requires then premiums to be made available. They can't cancel you if you meet those standards. But we're walking a tightrope because we don't want the insurance industry to pull up and leave California, and yet they're saying to us, you can't force us to sell our product. So what we're trying to do is work with the industry to say, look, it's in our shared interest to agree on criteria that we encourage homeowners, property owners to meet. And if we do, then let's make an agreement that those will be, let's say, high priority to continue coverage. So if any of you have gotten those letters or get those letters, please contact our office in Santa Cruz. I can give you cards at the time of our break. So let me just conclude on a couple of the bills that we've introduced this year. My Senate Bill 1372 for wildlife corridors. Some of you are familiar with the work we've been doing on Highway 17. Mark Stone's been supportive of this effort. The Board of Soups has been supportive. It's to get an underpass. You know, mountain lions used to move across 17. Then to protect drivers, we put barriers along the center to keep cars on their side of the road. It's reduced head-on collisions. It's helped public safety. But when those mountain lions now come up onto 17, as opposed to making it to the other side, they start wandering north and south and are more susceptible to being hit by vehicles. And it's not just mountain lions, it's deer, etc. So these natural wildlife corridors that humans, through our intervention, have interrupted, this legislation seeks to work with Caltrans. But our relationship with Caltrans has been they have their prescriptions of how they build roads, how they repair roads, and wildlife corridors aren't part of that. So when we try to get wildlife corridors included in that planning, we're starting from scratch. We're dealing with a bureaucracy that says, no, that doesn't work. This legislation would say as part of any road planning that Caltrans does, any SB1 dollars being spent for rehab and et cetera has to incorporate wildlife corridor consideration. It would be statewide. There's some spots we're looking at now in the Coyote Creek area, north of Morgan Hill, again to preserve the natural habitats of wildlife. In the native plant area, I was really impressed by Tim's presentation, complete with the sound effects. I have a bill, Senate Bill 1208, sponsored by the Native Plant Society of California. It focuses on one indigenous plant. It's a succulent called the Dudleya. I don't know if any of you know of the Dudleya. It's become very popular in Asian culture as a house plant, a garden plant. They can't get enough of them. The problem is poachers are pulling them out of our hillsides, Big Sur, other coastal areas, putting them into sport duffel bags, going to the San Francisco airport and boarding planes to different countries in Asia Pacific and selling them up to $100 per plant. So up to now, it's been a minor fine, up to $1,000. And so that's just a cost. They can sell a bag for $250,000. We don't let them take them out, even if they pay the fine. It's illegal to pull them. But it's not a deterrent. So this legislation would give law enforcement, including Fish and Wildlife, higher fining capacity and should charge it as a crime. And to do public education that it's illegal to remove this species of native plant in the state of California. The Native Plant Society has some of its roots with the naturalist Lester Roundtree. She used the name Lester for her publications because as a woman, the name was considered to be a male writer and she had a higher chance of publication. This was back in the 1940s, 50s, 30s, 40s, 50s. Her grandson, Lester Roundtree, was the director of the Environmental Studies program at San Jose State University. He just passed away a couple of months ago, that carried on her work in terms of ecological planning, particularly focused on climate impacts in the state of California. So I just want to give a shout out to the Lester Roundtrees of several generations. So I think I will wrap up there. I know we're on a timetable. I don't know if there's time for questions from the group, but I will be around if any of you have questions or comments. I just want to close again by thanking all of you for being here and to acknowledge the work represented around this room, I'm so privileged to represent the county of Santa Cruz. Bruce knows this. He had the same privilege when he was in Sacramento and now on the Board of Soups. A lot of folks in Santa Cruz take for granted the level of engagement, public engagement, and proactive work. I can tell you, it's not like this in all counties in the state of California. And I just want to applaud the engagement, the work that you do, and a lot of what you do for this watershed is and will be a model for what we do in other areas of the state. Senate Bill 45, also the governor has a bond measure that mirrors Senate Bill 45, so we'll keep you posted as that moves forward. It would generate about $5.5 billion. We also have a $30 million now continuing allocation for fish and wildlife, specifically for watershed management. So we're trying to do our best to invest and keep on the front end and keep pace with the work that you're doing.